Some of these altcoins can do 1,000%. Do I see Bitcoin going up 1,000% the next year? Not necessarily.
Bitcoin is the crypto that gets the most large investor interest.
My bread and butter has always been the altcoins. I'm not going to really change that now. That's what's got me where I am today.
Right now, in this moment, probably for the next year, I'm more of a Bitcoin maximalist.
Hi everyone, I'm Giovanni. Welcome back to our show. Today I'm here with Joe DiPasquale, CEO of hedge fund BitBull Capital, and prominent altcoin trader Donny, better known as Altcoin Dad. Thank you to be with us today, guys. Let's start with Joe. So, since the beginning of December, Bitcoin has been trapped in the mid-low 7,000s. What is your reading of the current situation in the Bitcoin market, Joe?
Sure. Well, Giovanni, last time we spoke, I remember, it was just after the rush of October with the news about China hitting. And that, as we've discussed, that sentiment was mostly speculative. So we saw it raise a lot. It had started going into that news at around 7,500 and then spiked up all the way to 10,600. What we've seen now is a fall below that 7,500 support line, obviously in a pretty tight range. Right now it's sitting at 7,155 or so. And we've seen it jump up all the way to 7,250, 7,275 over the last several days. I expect it to continue to be in that range, but we've noticed, and from technical analysis, just lower highs and wedging, but having very weak support. So I'm generally bearish on Bitcoin this month and feel that it could even dip back into the 6,000s.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Donny, about Joe's analysis? I know that you are mainly an altcoin trader, but maybe you can give your perspective on it.
Well, technicals aren't really my specialty either. I'm more of a fundamental trader, but from what I see, and it wouldn't surprise me to go back down to the 6,000s. I'm seeing a lot of charts on crypto Twitter showing 4,000. Not really sure if that's gonna transpire or not. But trading the crypto markets for the last 6 years, nothing really surprises me at this point. So, I think that's pretty fair. I think we might see a range, and me personally as an altcoin trader, hope that we see some kind of tight range, between 7,000 and 8,000, maybe 6,500 and 8,000. That way, hopefully more attention and more money will flow to the altcoins. And that's kind of the position I'm taking.
Donny, your nickname on Twitter used to be Bitcoin Dad. Why did you change it to Altcoin Dad? Does it reflect a change of your trading philosophy?
No, not at all. Ultimately, Bitcoin is king. So I'm trading altcoins to get more Bitcoin ultimately. So it doesn't really change my outlook or trading, perspective. But ultimately, it was just, it's been a 2-year bear market. It's been rough for us altcoiners. So I felt it was fitting to kind of change it up. Looks like some of these coins might be turning around, possibly, getting a little more bullish in general from what I see in the charts and fundamentals. Looks like it possibly could be turning around for some coins. Is it going to be as easy as 2017? I don't think so. I mean, the market's really diluted nowadays. We had the Russia ICOs, when things were happening back then, we were dealing with, 1,000, 1,500 altcoins. Now we're 3,500 plus. So I don't think it's going to be quite like it was in 2017 if altcoins were to start popping off. But ultimately, if you have done your due diligence, I feel that you could do pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Joe, what do you think? What do you feel about altcoins? How much interested in altcoins are investors at your hedge fund?
I think there's certain altcoins that are interesting. There's obviously been a lot of news in and around, Ethereum from the Istanbul fork this weekend, where we saw the price go up about 4% after a successful fork. And then staking has really been of interest to, I think, investors and funds recently, because there's this consistent dividend that you can get. Actually, just in the last day, Kraken announced Tezos staking with a rate of 6%. And that's after, Coinbase announced Tezos staking. And then, of course, Binance also announced Tezos staking. So the staking coins like Tezos or Decred or Cosmos, even EOS, on a separate note, has been of interest to people. So those are the altcoins that I think I hear about a lot.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Donny? Are altcoins like Tezos and the ones that Joe mentioned at the center of your attention too?
Tezos is one of my favorites. I really think, it's got a good base. It's 1.2 billion cap. It's a little high for me as a trader, but to diversify my portfolio, I make sure I do have high caps in the coins I hold. Can't beat it. It was an ICO that raised 250 or $230 million. They have a lot of big supporters behind it. So personally, I like that coin. I did see the staking. I think Binance even has a 0% kind of fee on their end. So that was enticing probably for a lot of people. It could be a solid altcoin going into 2020 and beyond.
Donnie, what does it mean to be an altcoin trader? Does it mean that you don't trade Bitcoin at the moment? And if so, what is the actual rationale behind this position? Wouldn't it be better to trade both altcoins and Bitcoin?
Yes and no. Some traders like to do both. Personally, maybe if it was a very low leverage position, they have these sites out now with, times 100 leverage, which I just think is really crazy. I wouldn't want to take a position like that personally. But for me, my bread and butter has always been the altcoins. I'm not going to really change that now. That's what's got me where I am today. So it wouldn't be bad to diversify a little bit. If I do take a position, it would be a small leverage position in a spot that I feel that, long-term would work out well, and not some high leverage position to where it would just be too much babysitting for me. I'd rather spend my time looking into altcoins and researching them. Specifically, me as an altcoin trader, I don't necessarily trade on a daily basis. I'm not a day trader by any means. I would say I'm more of an investor, to buy coins to where I think they're at their lows, or start building a position then, and just kind of ride it out from that point forward. Being that we are in a 2-year bear market, I feel now would be, it has been a good time to start buying some altcoins, which is what I've been doing.
Mm-hmm. Joe, does that kind of position reflect the typical profile of one of your investors at BitBull?
Well, for us, we actually run 2 funds. One fund has those longer term holds that Donnie was mentioning, and then another fund is more market neutral and does very short term holds, usually less than a couple days. For us, we do both Bitcoin and altcoins, and we do altcoins either if there's strong news or events around an altcoin that we believe is coming up, or if we actually like volatility on either side, both up and down. And so, just recently there's been a pretty tight corridor that Bitcoin's been trading in. So, it's about, an annualized volatility of about 30%. But if you go down to the altcoins, for example, Stellar has been really volatile recently. And so we sometimes want to, if we see that it's going, a couple standard deviations away from maybe its historical price, then we will want to get in either long or short on that side.
Would you say that volatility is something good or something that keeps people away from altcoins?
I think for many people, it keeps them away. For us in our fund, it's attractive because it allows us an opportunity to see pricing errors, I guess, or just pricing anomalies. And so then to get in on either side of the volatility, if we feel like there's a spread that we can make.
People have been talking a lot about this upcoming altcoin season, when altcoins will eventually take over Bitcoin in terms of market dominance. So I would like to know your perspective on this. Donnie, what do you think? Is this a scenario which is something possible?
I'm always optimistic about altcoins. Like I said, after a 2-year bear market, this really reminds me a lot of 2016 leading up to 2017, the despair. Even myself, somebody who's been in the game for 6 years, started having my doubts, is it different this time? Are the markets not going to rebound? But ultimately it looks like, we're sitting at 65% or so Bitcoin dominance. I would like to see it in the 50s personally, and it looks like it's kind of teetering on the support of the dominance in general. So all it might take is a little push, and a lot of that money could go to altcoins. So that's why I'm thinking, if Bitcoin stays in this range, we could see some of this money flowing into altcoins, and then you'll see the dominance kind of take a dive and get into the 50s percentile.
What do you think, Joe? Do you agree with this kind of perspective?
I do. I agree that the sentiment on altcoins is often a little too bearish. So the 65% dominance that Bitcoin has may decrease, but overall, I'm most bullish on Bitcoin. I think no one has kind of the hold on the market or the actual transactions that Bitcoin has. And so I'm more right now in this moment, and probably for the next year, I'm more of a Bitcoin maximalist.
Mm-hmm. But that's interesting because in a recent tweet, for example, Donnie said that this is actually the worst time ever to be a Bitcoin maximalist. So I might have found a point of disagreement between you two guys. Donnie, what did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, if I was somebody that bought the top in 2018 or 2017 with altcoins, and I rode it all the way down to now, I feel there'd be a lot more upside in holding these bags if you haven't cut your losses yet, than selling everything you have in altcoins and just sitting in Bitcoin. I feel that there would be a better way of making your money back if you were to ride out the altcoins for another cycle versus just selling it and holding Bitcoin at that point. Some of these altcoins can do 1,000%. So from this point, if they were to go up 1,000%, do I see Bitcoin going up 1,000% in the next year? Not necessarily. So risk reward in my eyes, I would not be selling my altcoin bags at lows, being down 80, 90%, or wherever you purchased, whether it was at the top a few years ago or building a position over the last year. I wouldn't be selling personally, and that's why.
Joe, how would you reply to that?
I guess for me, Bitcoin is the crypto that gets the most large investor interest. For example, if you look at Grayscale's offering, the vast 90+% is in their Bitcoin trust, even though they offer Ethereum and a multi-coin option as well. And so with the volume so low and with large investors still just starting to get in the space, I think that Bitcoin is still the first kind of point of sale. As Donnie said, there are definitely these altcoins that are doing well. But for me, I guess because I've seen so many cases of people getting burnt on altcoins, I'm a little more conservative. So if you talk to me about altcoins, like I think of Ethereum even, where they're really moving very successfully towards changing to a proof of stake, which will be a huge differentiator in the market. And that will be in 2021. So there are things like that I'm excited about. But even with some of these initial launches of coins not going well for pricing, it makes me a little once bitten, twice shy about investing in many of them.
And and in Joe's perspective, I don't know what kind of limits you guys have in regards to the altcoins. If you have, hey, we're not going to invest in anything that's under a certain market cap either. And as an altcoin trader, things have changed dramatically. I've specifically traded on Bittrex, and living in the United States, there's so many regulations now, so many coins being delisted. Things are definitely changing. Which is good and bad. I welcome the regulations, but it seems like they're kind of cutting us off at the knees as an altcoin trader living in the United States, being that there's these regulations, sites we can't access, coins we can't trade. So that does make things a little more difficult being an altcoin trader.
Are you criticizing the way the United States regulates cryptocurrency?
I feel that we could open our eyes here, in the United States. We see China kind of doing a lot of things with the blockchain. Seems like they're supporting cryptocurrencies in general a little more open. The United States kind of seems to still have the hard stance. You had Donald Trump tweet about Bitcoin a couple months ago, how he didn't like it and, preferred the dollar. And, so I would like them to see a little more open-minded about things regarding cryptocurrencies. And I feel that, potentially they're missing out on an opportunity for this new technology that's coming out. I do see the reasons behind it. I mean, when I first started trading back in 2013, 2014, it was the Wild West. So many shady things were happening, people running off with money. So I get why the regulations are going into place, but I just hope that somebody had, their ear to let them know, hey, not everything is bad. There are good projects out there. I understand the regulation portion of things, but maybe loosen it up a little bit.
Of course.
Or get some clarification. If you're going to do it, clarify it, roll it out, and that's it. It seems like it's changing every month. There's something different, there's something new, there's something being tweaked. And I'd rather just have it, hey, it is what it is, this is what it's going to be, and that's it, rather than changing it every other day, it seems like.
Right. So, Joe, what's the average opinion about this from the point of view of one of your investors at BitBull? Are they also looking forward for a better regulatory framework in the United States?
I think everyone wants just a clearer regulatory framework. So as we know, Bitcoin and Ethereum now have both been deemed commodities. But for the rest of the cryptos, unless there are one-offs such as Telegram or Kick or others, it's murky as to what is a security and what isn't. And we definitely are yearning for just some clarity on that, and so that would be helpful. But whether we treat all of them almost as securities, and the exchanges, so just to be careful, essentially, it doesn't really matter to us how they're deemed, but we would love to see that clarity if it come along.
Is there any jurisdiction in the world which you would point as a model for the United States to follow?
No, I actually think the United States is a leading jurisdiction, and the reason that it is because it's being more careful than many other jurisdictions, and it's kind of excluding coins from being just deemed a commodity or being investable by anyone. So we're okay with that. I think everyone's okay with that. But I think the clarity on, okay, these, this set of coins is a security and this set is not, would be great.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. Donnie, I would like to ask you, is there any specific coins that were delisted in the United States that you were betting on, or that you were following, that you thought they were good potential, but they were victim of this kind of very severe regulatory framework?
Not necessarily. I mean, Bittrex has made a lot of delistings over time. A lot of them were dead projects, dead blockchains. So I kind of get their position. I did have a couple positions that I was holding just for another cycle in general, not necessarily for some breaking edge technology. And they don't really explain, hey, we're delisting it because of XYZ, because of the security, because of, the dead blockchain or an abandoned project. So, it's kind of hard. It seems like, hey, the United States wants to look out for their investors and protect them. And that's why they kind of put some of these regulations in place. But then the people that are in the United States that might and haven't already invested in some of these projects, then they get delisted, and my investment's down 75% in a day. So, the protection, protect the people from potentially investing, okay, but the people that are involved are taking a hit in the meantime.
So some altcoin critics, like Eric Crown, say that the liquidity of the altcoin market is too low, which makes trading alts far too risky.
It would be like trading drugs, basically. It's like, what's the point?
What do you think about this kind of statement?
Well, I would disagree. You got to have a risk reward. You got to diversify. I wouldn't say, hey, go all in this altcoin that only has one BTC volume a day. So, if you diversify, just like, I did years ago, ultimately one day it might have no volume, and 6 months later, it could be top of the board of the exchanges trading hundreds of Bitcoins. So if you're looking for a quick trade, I would say that might not be the best idea. But ultimately, the liquidity will come at some point. Once these cycles start taking place again, the money flows in, the people jump on the bandwagon, and you start seeing some action across the board on these altcoins. So I personally, I invest in altcoins that have market caps a couple $1 million all the way up to $1 billion. So, if you diversify enough, I feel that it's safer than just saying, hey, I'm going to just focus on these 5 altcoins that are $1 million market cap with very low liquidity. It could take a while to get rid of those positions. Yeah, especially if you build a big position. But this is what's worked for me in the past. I don't see why I would want to change my strategy now.
Joe, what do you think about it?
So I actually do prefer larger volumes. So even the Bitcoin volume has been tapering off as of late, and I think over the holiday season we'll continue to see lukewarm volumes for both Bitcoin and alternative coins. The issue with that for me is that it creates unexpected movements because you can have larger purchasers come in and create a lot of volatility. Essentially, even we've talked about market manipulation before, either a spike or a quick drop in the price. And so even with the lower volumes of Bitcoin, and especially as you get towards altcoin, it creates unexpected movements. And usually those are just a quick blip and the price will go back to what it is. But in trading, it can either force you to get kind of, if you set some sort of stop limit order, it can wipe you out, even though it was just a blip and the price recovers. Or it can create other issues such as scaring the market and then the market actually following a trend either up or down before another shoe either drops or it goes up. So I stay away from truly low volume crypto assets unless there's something specific that I know about that crypto asset, because I don't like the unexpected movements that can result.
Okay, so I mean, as an individual investor, or I guess in Joe's place, as a trading fund, probably has a lot more money to put into the market as just an individual investor. So for me personally, taking a half a Bitcoin, position on an altcoin isn't as risky as a fund that might be dealing with hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin to try to build a position. So, for me or a lot of the people that are starting to get involved or is interested in cryptocurrencies in general or altcoins, they might be in a little better position to build on this based on the lower liquidity. If you were some whale or you're a fund, they're not going to necessarily be focusing on these small market caps because the books are so thin. It can take just a sneeze or a fat finger to drop the market, 30-40% in one trade. So, and that's my perspective. I'm not necessarily building 100 Bitcoin altcoin position. But for me and maybe some of the other altcoin traders, they do something on a smaller scale to where maybe a fund would not be in that position.
Joe, do you agree with what Donnie just said about the difference between like a perspective of an individual investor from the perspective of someone who is actually managing a hedge fund?
I do agree that there are different issues that come at play when you play with larger dollar values, because there is, of course, anytime you purchase or sell a large amount of crypto assets, there can be some slippage. But in general, I think, if you're looking from an investor's point of view, either the outlook should be the same on a specific asset, whether you believe it'll go up over time or down. So I think, there are probably specific alternative coins that we would come into agreement with that are strong, but generally I would avoid them of lower volume coins because of unexpected changes that can cause even a strong coin to lose value.
Because I am actually curious to know, like, what is your vetting process in terms of evaluating which which altcoins are actually worth to invest to, and which ones are not?
Most definitely. I mean, me personally, like I said, I focus on the fundamentals. I'm not a technical analysis type of guy or guru. I don't really have any financial background. Prior to me, doing crypto full time, I was in the insurance business. So, this wasn't necessarily my forte. Not like I came from Wall Street and here I am jumping into crypto. So for me, the fundamentals is what I focus on. They have a strong community, a hard working development dev team that are constantly reaching their goals, and new technology. Following the roadmaps, communicating with the community. Those are all things that I look at. And I like some of these projects that are 4 or 5 years old that are still working hard. They might be overlooked. They're under $10 million market cap, but they're still doing things to this day, 5 and 6 years later. Personally, I've never been a fan of ICOs because you're giving them a paycheck up front. Some of these other altcoins that are mineable and are proof of work, these developers have to work in order for their project to be successful. So I feel the incentive are with some of these projects that are proof of work due to that aspect versus, hey, here's $30 million up front, make something for us. The developers are the ones that are mining it with the rest of the investors or buying on the market and ultimately hoping the project's success based on their own work.
Mm-hmm. Joe, what do you think? Is it pretty much the same method that you use at BitBull to evaluate altcoins?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, so we have two different funds. One fund is more of a longer term investing type hold. And the other fund, and that would take a similar similar perspectives to the one that Donnie mentioned about what assets we believe are fundamentally strong and potentially market changing and have support from the community and developers and investors and that sort of thing. On the other side, though, we have a fund that does mostly shorter holds and trading. That's actually almost, it's very heavily technical analysis. So we actually don't look at the fundamentals in that case. We only look at the actual price and the movement and the historicals. And we use a number of different models, either looking at momentum or looking at mean reversion. So just to weight it, essentially just to make decisions on where we think the price will head in the next 24 to 48 hours. So we have a couple different ways that we trade.
I would like to consider a concrete scenario now. It's about Matic Network, which is an altcoin that went up like 180% in 2 weeks and then crashed down 70% in a couple of hours. So how do you deal with this kind of scenario? Is it possible to predict this kind of pump and dump?
I'm kind of a loss for words for that one. I personally didn't follow the project. I wasn't an investor in it. It seemed like it had high liquidity. It was on Binance. So it seemed like there was volume there. It obviously has gone up leading up to that crazy dump that it had. A lot of the things I'm seeing, it looks like it could be insiders on their end. Looks like they moved a large amount of their coins according to the Block Explorer, and it all went to Binance. So a lot of people think it might be an inside job. I'm not one to necessarily point fingers, but that's what it kind of looks like. It looks like a lot of their the developers' tokens went to Binance, and what explains such a large dump. And unfortunately, in cryptocurrencies, you can't control that. And that's just the risk you're going to take.
Is it possible to prevent something like that to happen, or it's just totally out of your control?
Well, I think Joe mentioned, stop losses. If you're, you're in profit, you're doing well, it wouldn't hurt to put something in to protect yourself, to at least, break even. Or if you're, a couple 100% up, at least do the stop loss at 100%. You're still taking a good amount of profit and doing well and protecting yourself against something like this. So if anything, that would be really, I could say, the only thing that would protect you for something like this.
Joe, can you comment on this specific case?
So it's true that Matic would be a little too early for us to invest in because of the lower volume. And actually, for me, this kind of exhibits a reason to stay away from the lower volume coins, just because, the story around that is people didn't know whether it was again a snowball effect that led to it dropping that, I don't know what, 60% down to about 2 cents, something like that. people initially got scared because of some tweets from the Matic Foundation and suspicious token movements, and then there was just a massive dumping of all of the coins. But I think that type of extreme volatility, and for us something that would be really hard to catch, makes us again go with generally higher volume assets.
What do you think, Joe? Can this prolonged stagnation of Bitcoin result in a positive trend for altcoins?
I think generally what it can do is allow the altcoins to take over some market share. As Donnie mentioned, Bitcoin's currently sitting at about 65% of the entire market cap of all crypto assets. But in general, Bitcoin and altcoins have moved together unless there's some specific case for a specific altcoin doing one thing or the other. So I think it'll be until the entire crypto asset space has some renewed interest potentially in the new year that all crypto assets will appreciate in value.
So we are moving towards the end of 2019. What do you think, guys? What is the most important event this year in the crypto space?
I don't know if there's necessarily one event. I think just the market action in general. I mean, we hit lows of 3,000. We bounced back up to 13,000. I think it shows that, Bitcoin's very resilient, and, I don't feel it's going away anytime soon. That's for sure. So I think that 2019 has shown that, after the highs of 2018, kind of brought everybody back down to reality, I guess you could say, but did show that there is still a lot of interest in Bitcoin in general. There's still a lot of buyers out there. It's good to see these larger, exchange talks. We got ICE and the CME and other institutions that are getting involved. So it is a little more reassuring on my end, but definitely for the newer investors, myself, I bought it at $1,000 back in 2013 and went down to 200. So I think they're just kind of getting a taste of what a lot of us experienced early on, from buying, $16,000, $17,000, $18,000 Bitcoin to having it down to 3,000. But to see it bounce right back up to 13,000 is definitely nice to see.
Joe, do you share Danny's point of view on 2019?
I do share Donnie's view. I think for me, I see two things. This year reinforced the case both economically for crypto assets. So we continue just at a macroeconomic level seeing ballooning debt from countries and other issues that lead to the recent Deutsche Bank report that digital currencies may come into the fore in the next couple of years. So, and then in addition, we see more technical advantages to digital currencies. And so, of course, the big Facebook Libra news was them trying to get all of the advantages of a digital currency for payments. And then, in addition, we see China, the EU, and others exploring launching digital currencies of their own. So this year, to me, just reinforced the economic and the technical support for digital assets.
I would like to know from Altcoin Dad if there is any specific altcoin we should look at in 2020, the most promising ones.
There's a couple. I mean, I mentioned Tezos. I feel that is a solid project, high market cap. There's some other coins that are lower market cap coins that I like myself. The ticker is DAG. It's called Constellation. They've recently gone into a contract with the United States Air Force, which is kind of big news. It's still at about $15 million market cap. There's the older coins I like Florin Coin, Radium. These are coins that are under a $5 million market cap, but have blockchains that are 4 and 5 years old with active development. The liquidity might not be there. They are traded on Bittrex, which is still a large exchange. And in my eyes, hardworking developers and projects with hardworking developers with time will pay off. Obviously, in a bear market, things are going to get sold off. People are going to forget about them until they're not forgotten. And then everybody's going to rush back to buy some of these coins.
Joe, what do you think about it?
I think in terms of altcoins that I believe will perform well, there's still a lot of excitement around BNB, Binance's coin. So that's one that has fundamentals that have a strong token economy, They have a lot of reasons that the BNB asset will continue to appreciate. There's some investor excitement around Maker as well, MKR, which is tied to a stable coin. Of course, there's with all of the volatility that we've discussed, stable coins remain attractive. Those are two crypto assets that I hear a lot about, but in general, as Donnie mentioned, with Tezos and the other staking coins, like Cosmos and others, those are also of interest.
I would like to know your price predictions for the top 3 altcoins for the end of 2019. Let's start with Altcoin Dad.
All right. So at the end of the year, I mean, I think we see Bitcoin still around this range in the next month. I don't really see it making a big move necessarily. So, I'll be somewhat optimistic and say maybe 8,000 for Bitcoin. And then what we got Ethereum next, currently around $144. Right now for the altcoins, I really don't see we're going to see some explosive move here in the next 30 days. I see it going into the first, second quarter of 2020. But I'll say Bitcoin at 8,000, Ethereum at 160, and then looks like Ripple is number 3. Ripple might see a little movement. I'm personally not a fan of Ripple, but if altcoins go up, I don't see why Ripple wouldn't either. So maybe say a quarter for Ripple. I'm a fan of Litecoin. It's one of those coins that have been around for a long time. Again, has a long chain. They're constantly trying to do new things. I saw at one point they did want to implement some kind of privacy function to it, kind of like Grin, like a Mimblewimble, I think is how you pronounce it. But I like Litecoin and I invested in also. So currently, it's at $44. So I could see that, maybe being at $50 here by the end of the year.
All right. Joe, what do you think about altcoin price predictions, including also Bitcoin?
Absolutely. And maybe this gives me an opportunity just to quickly show some of the technical analysis. So this is something we prepared for Bitcoin. I differ from Donnie in that I actually believe that Bitcoin will end the month weaker than it is now. So right now it's hovering at around 7,200. And the 7,200 line has proven kind of a weak support line. There's only a few times when it's hovered around 7,200, but we do continue to see this various descending triangles, as you can see these blue lines. The next support line isn't really until just above 6,000, 6,200 or so. And I believe that we could see it in in these lows that it's already gone to, these lows of 6,800 or lower, going down to there. So Bitcoin I'm bearish on, and I believe it'll end the month in the 6,000s, likely the high 6,000s. And then with Ethereum I believe will actually hold its ground. It's sitting at around 144 right now. I think Ethereum will hold its ground because of the strong technical developments, and Ethereum is generally undervalued. It fell a lot more than Bitcoin has in the last year. And then, with the others that were mentioned, I guess I don't like whether it's Bitcoin Cash. I would imagine it'll lose ground as Bitcoin does, or Ripple. I do see that. I haven't seen a lot of strong news come out of Ripple recently, so I believe it'll lose ground as well. But just wanted to show this is why, because of the general descending movement of Bitcoin, is part of the reason we think it'll decline, and then also the lower and lower volumes that we've seen, which I don't think will resuscitate during December.
Thank you guys for being with us. This was Joe DiPasquale, CEO at BitBull Capital and prominent altcoin trader, Altcoin Dad. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more exciting content.
Cointelegraph. Like, subscribe, and hodl.